So welcome to the Radio FM 3.1. You're speaking with Joyce. That was actually terrible. I should never be in radio. But just welcoming you guys and introing Nova Entertainment, who is Australia's leading independent radio station. It includes Nova 96.9 and the Smooth FM, which is probably one of my preferable radio stations to listen to in Australia. I can't say whether you guys have listened to radio before, George. Have you listened to any of Nova stuff?
A little bit, yeah, love it. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, George, how you doing? I love the moat. Love the moat.
Yeah, thanks, you too. It is the month for November, so this is a great chance for a bit of a pitch on November. If you're not sure what it is, have a bit of a Google. But yeah, great to be here. But Mitch, it'd be awesome. Yeah, maybe if you want to introduce yourself and give a bit of background on your role at Nova, and we can take things from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, George. Thanks, Joyce. So as they just said, my name's Mitch, and I've been at Nova now for approximately 18 months. So I'm going to still call myself new. I haven't been there for the whole period, but I suppose if I reflect on what I've been doing for the last 10 years, it's always been in and around learning and development. It's always I feel like it's in my DNA now, from kind of sales capability through to kind of human resources side now at Nova. Interestingly about Nova, so yes, you touched on radio, and Joyce, you may still have a career ahead of you as a morning announcer. Who knows? But Nova's kind of everywhere now. So it's not just the radio stations that we do. We've got our own kind of podcast network where we've got original podcasts. We do streaming services. We've got kind of audio on demand. So I think if we look at it from a pure listener's perspective, we connect to about 6.3 million Australians every day, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. Did you have anything that you did before learning and development? What kind of made you get into that space?
Interestingly, I was a butcher, so total like out of sight. So I was training to be a butcher, and I decided that I wanted to go back to uni and study primary school teaching. Lasted 6 months, didn't enjoy it very much, and then just started working full time, and somehow found my feet in a training role for Vodafone, where I was looking after like our 50 odd stores in New South Wales and the ACT, and just taking them through kind of induction and sales training and well-being training, that kind of thing.
Amazing. Wow. Before kind of getting into this space, I worked in finance. So it's really interesting just to see where everyone's kind of stories came from. So I guess let's start at the beginning, because we're here to really talk about learning and development and EdApp. What kind of challenges, when you came to Nova, were you trying to solve that kind of made you go with EdApp?
So interestingly, when I first started at EdApp, I was sitting with as part of the interview phase, actually, I was sitting with the commercial director, and they were really excited. They were talking about they've just onboarded EdApp. It's this revolutionary micro-learning platform, and we want you to own it. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I've never heard of it. Yes, I'm familiar with other learning management systems and experience platforms and that kind of thing. And I was like, cool. First day on the job, prior to actually starting, I jumped online, signed up, and that actually meant that I didn't use the SSO option. So there's a few hurdles for me to get started. But when we first started, it was supposed to be a customer-facing platform where we'd have about 5,000 of our listeners and people who are associated with Nova actually get on and learn a little bit more about the industry and what we do. And as I was onboarded and got into the process and understood kind of what it was there for, it very much quickly became a tool for very short, sharp compliance training, as well as evolving into an all-encompassing onboarding platform for us. So we have kind of changed our trajectory from where it started, but I feel as though it's really kind of benefited us greatly from that perspective, and really excited to kind of share more as we go through.
That's awesome. And from a learner's experience, Mitch, how's that been? I'd imagine there's a varied level of stuff in terms of technology experience. Yeah, how's the adoption been and the experience for your learners?
So Yeah, it's been really good so far. So I think when we first put out a training session, it was called the Radio Code of Practice, and ordinarily that session was a national roadshow style session where our head of legal, head of people would go around the country, sit everybody in a room and say, cool, these are all the things you can say on air, these are the things you can't say, here are the consequences. And it was a very much a dry kind of session, because I suppose that was the nature of that policy. And so the first real piece of content we stuck on EdApp was our radio code of practice, and made it mandatory for all of our staff across the country to really get into it. So rather than having our teams sit in a session for an hour or two, sign on a dotted line after falling asleep and not remembering anything, we're actually able to roll out something and get more than 90% completion across the board, which was really pleasing. Interestingly though, I mean, as you said, we've got a wide variety of different people. So we've got everybody who it's their first job out of high school, they're a sales coordinator, through to people who have been on the radio now for 25 plus years, people who have never used a smartphone, people who don't use email for that matter, which seems crazy, but we've still got a couple of them announcing out of our Adelaide office. But we've made it as easy as possible. And so we've given people the option to be able to use their phone, use their desktop if they're more comfortable doing that, having people sit with them and walk them through that process. And we've actually found the adoption really pretty spectacular, if I'm honest, without a huge amount of pushing. I think with any new piece of technology, there's going to be a little bit of resistance. But once people are actually on there learning and understanding, hey, this is actually really easy, we can do this in our own time, it's not going to take away from me going and pushing products on our clients. We found that, yeah, people started to, word of mouth, I suppose, was the way that it started to spread. I remember we had one of our very legacy-based sales directors from Sydney. I remember going into the elevator with him, and he was talking to me about how long he'd been at Nova, and he'd never experienced compliance training as good as what we'd just done. And I think that was probably the first piece of feedback that I got, and I was like, you know what, we're doing something right here.
I feel like, number one, I love the way you said legacy based.
I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to say, I didn't want to be politically incorrect, but look, he's been at Nova for, I think, 18 years. And he's part of the furniture of the office, right? Everyone knows him, but he's also one of those people who he'd go to one of those compliance sessions and he'd sit in the back row, and then you'd ask him what had happened. He's like, I don't know, be on his phone half the time. So we found that across the board, these kind of face-to-face compliance-based training sessions, just while it's a necessary evil in some times, we found this was a far better way to do it.
Well, if he's on his phone half the time, he might as well do compliance.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you've kind of talked about like how amazing the uptake is. How is that compared to, I guess, other systems you've used previously in the past, if you have at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I reflect a little bit. So I've been lucky enough to be part of a diverse range of organizations. So when I started at Vodafone, very much enterprise based, they were huge. They had so many staff. I didn't actually get access to their learning system at all. So I was too junior for that. While I created some of the content that was housed there, I never had access to the admin panel or anything like that, but they were very much people hated it, but knew that they had to get on and do it. I then went to another company that was very much in the infancy and had a proprietary system that they developed themselves, which was clunky. And while I was able to get in there and use it, it was more of a store visit tracking system with some learning built on the side, like a couple bolt-ons that people say, yeah, cool, we'll cover that learning piece off just because like we have to. I then went to a startup, and this was really interesting. We had a very basic piece of technology that we used that was built in-house again. And it was literally, they'd take a PowerPoint presentation, change the ratios to fit on a phone screen and called it learning. And so moving then, I suppose, into the world of Nova and having this tool at our fingertips where we can create things that are of a mundane topic, which is compliance, but be able to create a little bit of excitement around them, as well as a bit of fun as well, I think has made a huge difference and kind of sets the platform apart from what I've used before, that's for sure.
Amazing.
And apologies, I've got a little visitor with me at the moment, so sorry if there's some background noise.
Would he like to join the conversation and contribute?
Hi. Do you want to come and say hi? Just really quickly, okay? He's brought the dog in as well. I don't know if I'll get her up, but Bowie's here to say hi.
Hi, Bowie.
I've got
What
my
do you think about
headphones in.
learning?
Here we go. You want to say hello? Say hi.
Hi.
Good
Hi.
job, buddy. You go finish your lunch, okay? There you go, buddy.
Nice lunch.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It's all good. He's just learning the ropes of
That's it.
and training.
Starting him early.
Awesome. And then I'd love to also know, when you guys started using EdApp as well, you probably had a lot of existing training in all different types of forms, maybe PDFs already, maybe Word docs. Love to talk through the process of how you kind of got that onto EdApp.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting. Like, I look at, we've traditionally been very much a share drive style business where all of the training material is just dumped in one place and you kind of sort through it to work out what's relevant, what's not. And so you're right, we had kind of PDF style training, which is just like your policy one pages and just documentation that was hard to understand. And essentially we would in the past give that to people and say, read that, sign on the line, and then you're trained. So make sure you don't do anything wrong. The other kind of piece of that is PowerPoint. I mean, I think that's the currency for a lot of people at the moment. And while it serves its purpose, I think a lot of our training was very much in that format and not built for purpose, built to be the easiest way to get a piece of information across and not necessarily meet the needs of learners.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you're using PowerPoints, Mitch, so just in that point, like, is there, I guess what's wrong with PowerPoints at the minute where you can't, it's not fit for purpose? Like what was really like the bigger use of using PowerPoint?
I think it's staff interaction. While you can build it in, you can, and I'm an absolute PowerPoint whiz. So if you ever need a hand, please let me know. I still love the platform for what it represents. Yeah. But I think when you think about traditional learning, you put people in a classroom, they're flicking through slides. It doesn't invoke emotion, right? It doesn't allow for people to really relate with the content that's being showed unless you're relying really heavily on a presenter to do that. The problem is, if you miss that session, you're sent the deck and you just run through it and there's no real connection to the content that's being showed. And there's no, I suppose, break in knowledge assessment or knowledge check or anything like that we're able to do with a platform like EdApp. And I mean, even like levels of gamification, you would pause your PowerPoint, you would go somewhere else and do something to engage the audience again and then come back. Yeah. So it's really interesting that people still rely on it very heavily, and we do in certain circumstances. But I think we kind of come to the happy medium where we know we can go to that location, which is PowerPoint, to do certain things. We go to EdApp to do other things, and hopefully keep people happy and engaged as through that process.
Yeah, I always feel like PowerPoint is definitely still there to help with presentations and facilitate conversation, but I've definitely seen it used in terrible ways where you have like 100 slides and I'm like, and it's 100 words on a slide.
Yeah,
and you're just kind of reading off the PowerPoint. Yeah, definitely.
No, exactly. We've all been there. Plenty of times.
I think there is that catchphrase. Is it death by PowerPoint? I think it's.
Yep.
I haven't heard that in a while, actually. I haven't heard that in a while. Like I said, we don't use too many, but yeah, awesome. Mitch, I'm actually curious how your learners typically take EdApp courses. Is it in their breaks or on the way to work, or do you set up sessions? Yeah, if you can tell us.
I think so. Interestingly, I think that's the beauty of it. They have the ability to do it wherever they want. So, I mean, when after the radio coded practice, that was kind of our test case to see, cool, is this going to work? And are we going to get the completion that we need? After that, we then went out and launched 6 compliance-based modules. And that was about in July last year. We launched one module every 2 weeks, and they ranged from anywhere from about 3 kind of lessons each to just one single lesson. All encompassing, it took about an hour to complete all 6, really straightforward. We found that people we'd see the completion data, people would be completing them on public transport on the way to work, in their lunch break, on their way home from work. I even had a call from a team member out of Brisbane that as soon as they realized that they had to do them, They pulled all of their team into we have a beanbag room in Brisbane. They sat on the beanbags, had some snacks, and they all just got on and did it, and then kind of got on with their role after that. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? You don't have to be in a certain time, certain place to complete it. There is total flexibility. And I'm an absolute sucker for jumping on the bus in the morning on the way to work, quickly getting it out, doing what I need to do to ensure that I am compliant, and going from there.
Amazing. I did have a question, but left my mind. Sorry.
All good.
No worries, Mitch. I'm really curious to know more about your commercial team and the plan there, and how you're looking to use that EdApp with your commercial team. So maybe a bit of background and insight into that.
No, for sure. So I think originally, as I said at the beginning, it kind of came on as an external facing platform where we get people to register and learn more about Nova. And that was from our commercial team. So predominantly our partners and our clients would get in and do some learning about Nova. We then launched a couple of systems-based training through Nova to support our commercial team. So we've got a bunch of back-end systems which we use for booking and appointments and that kind of thing, and airtime. And so we pushed a bunch of training on those systems early days to our commercial teams. But other than that, we then kind of had a bit of a break, and we really used it for our compliance and then onboarding. We've got some huge plans for next year. So we're going down this road of, we're calling it crowdsourced training, where we're getting experts from around the country in certain areas of whether it's sales cycle, sales process, sales system, and they're delivering micro learning in person through a webinar style event. Off the back of that, I'm digitizing all of that content into micro learning modules and creating an onboarding path for anybody new that's joining our sales team. And so what'll happen, if you join 6 months later, you weren't able to dial into that training session, all the material is going to be there for you. You can do it in your own time within that kind of, say, first week of starting, and you're ready to go and upskilled, rather than relying on finding a 30-minute slot with the expert that previously they'd have to do. So there's going to be some really exciting work that happens off the back of it. I think there's a bit of work for me to do in the meantime, though, because we've predominantly used it for compliance work, people are starting to associate it's our compliance platform. And I'll get into an elevator, they know that I'm the compliance guy, and they stop talking. So I've got a bit of work to do from like a PR perspective to say, cool, it's not just for compliance. We can get out there and we can do all sorts of things on EdApp, and it's going to be an exciting 2023.
Yeah, I love that you are trying to empower the people who have the knowledge to actually train and not have it kind of all fall on your shoulders. I feel like a lot of L&D managers, they always feel a bit overwhelmed with, oh, I have to get out all this training to everyone. But you can actually empower like other managers to provide that training, even like other learners and employees to learn off each other. I think I respect that a lot.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to do it. And I think in the past, a lot of organizations, they go and outsource it all, and they bring somebody in and they take them through their sales process. And it's not always unique to that business. And I think we've had a lot of success. As I think the blurb said, we're the #1 rated metro radio station. And we've got some incredible people through all of our locations. And to be able to utilize their experience, but then kind of give that to the benefit of anybody starting after, is going to be really exciting.
I have a question. Going into radio, what have you learned from just general radio? Because I think you've gone across multiple industries, right?
Well, my background was other than being a butcher, was telecommunications. So I spent a lot of time kind of understanding radio networks and cellular networks and the ins and outs of a mobile phone and what it actually does, and understanding the technical side of it. I think going into radio, I've realized that a lot of what I used to know and thought was important isn't really that important. There's a lot more real world application that is. And so I think I've actually used EdApp to push out material on how radio works, so that people who join our industry actually understand kind of the frequency modulation that happens in the background and all of those buzzwords that you typically hear but don't really know what they mean. I think that there's that part to it as well, but also kind of it is a totally different demographic of people that I've been working with. And that aspect of it is really exciting, I found. I've been so lucky when I was in telco to connect with people all over the world from different skill sets, but it was very much a technically heavy space. Whereas here it's very much a, I'm going to say it's more social, but at the same time, it's more topical. It's things that are mattering then and now, and being almost reactive to what's happening in the world around you. And I think that that's kind of given me the ability to put my ear to the ground and kind of see what's happening, see what's relevant, and stay on top of things.
Yeah, that's amazing. And actually, I remembered my question from before when you're talking about your 6 modules for compliance. What did you guys do before that? I just love to know.
So I think, interestingly, similar to the code of practice, we had somebody from our human resources team, and then we'd have somebody from our legal team, and they would go to each location around the country. We got six sites, and they would conduct face-to-face training. And it was very much as George put it before, death by PowerPoint. It was quite bleak, but at the same time, and I've said it before, kind of that necessary evil, right? We have to make sure our people have this understanding of what goes into the kind of governance of our organization. And so that was kind of common practice. And I mean, I've been in organizations that do that, and they still do that today. I mean, I was sitting in the startup, and we had our local head office based in Singapore, and we just had somebody from Singapore get on and read us a 3-page policy document word for word and say, cool, you're trained now. And so I feel like because I've been able to have that go through that, I've got the benefit of, cool, what actually works. And so with those 6 modules, while we could have made them in-house, we actually outsourced it. So we went to a company that I'd worked with in the past, and they're actually based in the UK, and they make amazing training material. Now, they'd never used EdApp, and I remember the first conversation was, cool, so we're going to make it in Articulate, and then we're going to send you SCORM, and you're going to host it. And I said, no, we're not doing it that way. You're going to build it directly into EdApp. And Joyce teed up all of the training for them, and they built their platforms team, built it directly into EdApp for us, and we're able to review it in real time. And I think they were pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to use and actually create content that was engaging and kind of made the learners want to continue on and learn more.
Awesome. And I think that also comes with a lot of design thinking and making sure that you provide relevancy to the training as well. And so I know that you kind of mentioned, you just kind of read off a policy and then you're like, you're trained now. How do you extract like what is important and then kind of put that all into one little lesson for everyone? I mean, it's kind of a curveball question, but
it's a really good question. I don't know. I feel like I've been around training environments enough, and I've sat in enough of those sessions to work out what is the most important thing people need to know. And I suppose you look at those documents, and while sometimes they are very dry and very, very much black and white, you have to be able to see them for what they represent and take that representation, and that's your learning, right? It's not these 6 points that are here on the piece of paper. It's what does that mean to me in my role, and what does that constitute the behaviors that I then need to have, whether it's the social media policy, whether it's the drugs and alcohol policy, all of these kind of things. So it was about kind of creating an understanding through, I suppose, using real world examples, right? Like it's the oldest language in training, just trying to relate it to people, right? Make it relevant to them. So yeah, we're able to create meaning from documents that I suppose all organizations have them, but that aren't necessarily riveting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at least for me, when I do training, I always want to know why. Why am I doing this?
Yeah, for sure.
You can't tell me why. I'm putting it to the side.
No, exactly right. And I think it really does come down to that behavior set. Just the pride that when we put our Nova hats on, and when we go out and we speak to clients and we represent at events, what are we actually doing? What are the behaviors that we expect? And I think when you take away that there's these, as I said, riveting documents, and we create meaning to them, it means that people will adopt them more frequently and be happy to get in and get stuck in and finish them.
And you mentioned there, Mitch, as well at the start, that your 90% average completion rate, which is fantastic. we have different people dialing into this call, but they might be listening after. But I guess what would be great is maybe from your perspective, is there any top tips you can share or features you've used in EdApp, such as gamification or leaderboards, any particular slide types, which can really help increase that completion and those 90%?
Yeah.
To preface it, I think we all have experienced like the pain and hair pulling you can get from trying to increase that completion rate. So I think any tips would be really helpful.
Look, I think we had a really solid comms plan before we launched this out. So I think we've got some really engaged teams that get together frequently, and we're able to really leverage a lot of those get-togethers as moments in which we could kind of talk about this subject. And I spoke earlier about creating meaning, and it's not just in the module itself. It's around how you communicate it out, how you kind of send people emails. It's the language that's being used. And I think for me, it was kind of being human about why we're doing it and putting it in language that people understood without saying, you got an email in your inbox saying the whistleblowing module is now available, go and complete it by this date, or there will be consequences. It's not how I like to operate, and it's not how people typically will feel engaged by materials. So I like to communicate in real world language, right? And try to relate to people at that level. I think when it came to the modules themselves, we made a real effort to ensure that each lesson was maximum 5 minutes. So where we had some borderline, so people could tap in and tap out when they wanted to, we had a couple that probably edged over from say 7 to 10 minutes or something like that. But typically we really kind of put a blanket ban on anything long form so that people could, just do it in their own time, do it when was relevant to them. And what we found is, and I'll use the whistleblowing pieces as the example, that was a 3-part lesson. And when I would be running the reports at the end of the week, you'd see that people would be at 33 or 66%. So we knew that people were completing, but they were just doing it in their own time. And so we felt that worked really well. We also ensured that there was kind of every 5 or 6 kind of lesson cards or slides that we had some element of reinvigoration, re-engagement, whether that was through a knowledge check, through a quick game, even a link to an outside source where, I mean, you can put a podcast into an EdApp module, right? So there were times when we have an amazing podcast called The Space, which is a 2 or 3 minute mindfulness podcast, and we actually inputted episodes of that into the PowerPoints so that people could re-energize, ready to go for the next round. So there's all sorts of different ways you can do it. I think we're not always perfect though, and I think, as you said, we're still at 10% of staff haven't done it. And it doesn't matter what we do. Sometimes like we'll get the head of our people, send them a direct email saying, hey, you haven't done 3 of 6 modules. Can you please go and do them? And we're still sitting there pulling our hair out saying, why have these people not done them? So there's no kind of magic potion to make it all work. I think it's just a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah, I think it's also really important just to like iterate and to see what works depending on the industry and the demographic of the people. Definitely one industry doesn't absolutely correlate to another one. So it does require a bit of trial and error for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Do you have any plans for 2023? Like, I think you talked a little bit about your sales piece. Like, love to know what other kind of plans you have.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got the sales piece that's going to be kicking off early next year. So we actually run our first crowdsourced training in January. So the first round of e-learning will go off the back of that through EdApp at the end of Jan as well. There's a plan to put in our next phase of onboarding as well. So we've already kind of built out a 12-week onboarding program, which all of our new starters go through. So they'll have a week's worth of content. They'll then have weeks 2 to 4 will have lighter content, and then weeks 4 through to 12, we'll just have kind of the rounding out content that they need to know to do their job. But essentially they're in the role and the rhythm now. We're going to step that up to phase 2. So we're looking at kind of functional level onboarding and how we ensure that different teams get the needs that they require. And we're actually going to upskill a bunch of other admins across our business so that it's not just me that's getting in and creating. We've got more people on, more hands on deck, I suppose. So we've got a pretty big year lined up. We're going to roll out the second round of compliance, and hopefully just through rapid refresh. So it's not a case of let's go and do this whole thing again. It's cool. Let's give you the key themes, push them out, and make sure that people are still kind of in that level of understanding.
That's so cool. And for anyone that doesn't know what rapid refresh is, it's just very simple multiple choice questions that you can kind of deliver in like 10 to 20 questions is usually what we recommend. And I think definitely where you're kind of going is where a lot of our clients want to go as well, in terms of like you might have quite a long course that you have to do, but then you don't want them to have to repeat it every year, especially if they kind of know the general gist of the content. It's just like almost quizzing them on key aspects of the course to make sure they, understand the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen that in the past as well. We've seen where people kind of rinse and repeat, do it every 12 months, and it becomes such an arduous process. And I mean, we've got the tools to be able to just do a quick knowledge assessment, understand that, hey, this lot of people, they're sweet, they don't need any more help. But then we also have the analytics in the background and say, cool, if there's a lot of people who are getting these questions wrong, what do we have to revisit, and what do we have to amend to make the learning more understandable, I should say.
Yeah. Analytics is always really helpful. I think when you initially didn't have analytics, you didn't know how to necessarily improve. But from there, you can actually carry on with that, as well as like feedback from your learners as well. I think you spoke a little bit about, being in an elevator with as a compliance guy, but any other type of feedback on just general learning that you guys are going? I know you guys talked about like doing your 60 question surveys that you do every year. How's that tracking?
Yeah, look, I think we're moving into a space where we're trialing slowly different platforms to do things that traditionally we've done very manually. And while we may not be kind of as tech savvy as some of the other industries out there, I think that people are starting to not be afraid to rely on the technology that sits in the background. So yeah, our engagement surveys are now run kind of purely through a third-party platform, which gives us an incredible amount of insights that we've never had before. We've also seen, and this is something that I'm remarkably proud of. So traditionally, our learning and development scores as part of the engagement survey have been typically quite low. This year, they rose more than 10 points across the board, which is almost unprecedented in terms of the engagement scores. So really proud that I think the way that we've tackled compliance, onboarding, some of the sales stuff that's coming next year, people are starting to really get on board with, and we are seeing results from an engagement perspective.
It's amazing. So it seems like your ROI is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I spoke about it before, but just if you have to take people out of their regular day for 2 or 3 hours where they can't go and see clients, can't go and make calls, can't produce amazing content on radio or in studio, you're really impacting their ability to do their role. But by rolling it out and having them be able to do the content in a time that is convenient to them has really proven super popular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even just like how I talked about empowering managers to train people, they also don't want to do it 20 times a day, and do the same thing. It can be quite, I guess, debilitating. But if you can kind of digitize it, it would just be able to scale just a bit more. I know we talk about scale, it's a bit of a buzzword, but in this case, it allows us to do, important things and have important conversations as well.
No, that's right. I mean, my boss, Amanda, I've saved her having to do 2 trips around the country where she would literally be in the back of a taxi, in a boardroom meeting, back to a plane, next location, and do that twice. So I think just from that one person's perspective, we've saved so much time and energy, and given them back the ability to have kind of meaningful conversations with people that will make real difference going forward.
That's amazing. Awesome. I know we're coming to the end of the webinar. I'd love to leave a little bit of space for a Q&A if anyone has anything. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time, Mitch. I know that I kind of sprung this on you.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, but it's great. And I think it's also a testament to how much you care as well. Like you have the technology in place, but you need someone to really champion and drive that learning and development across the company, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I love doing these kind of things. So put me in the hot water anytime you like.
That's
Love
great.
it.
Thanks, Mitch. Really appreciate your time. And
Thanks,
I
Josh.
don't think there are any I don't think there are any questions actually. So we must have answered everything with your answers, Mitch. So it must have been 10 out of 10 for covering everything. Yeah. Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Mitch, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.